Throughout the history of the not-so-civilized Western world, England has committed a great number of heinous crimes against the underdeveloped countries it once controlled. One of the countries the Empire of England controlled was India. Through a series of fights, treaties, and more fights, the British conquered India in the 1750s and the East India Company was established. The British viewed their Indian colony as a foothold into Asia, and being the cash cow that it was, Britain held onto their colony for dear life. Being the greedy colonizing country England was at the time, they began trying to find new ways to make money off their recently annexed state. First they tried selling tobacco and betel nut before finally taxing Indian salt. This might not sound that bad to us industrialized Westerners, but in pre-industrialized India, salt was one of the few commodities an endemically poor country such as India could produce on its own. People could just gather seawater and let it dry where it would then be sold on the streets. In 1882, however, England passed a law that prohibited Indians from collecting and selling salt, a necessity of their diet. Indian citizens were forced to buy the vital mineral from the British rulers, who in addition to exercising a monopoly over the manufacture and sale of salt, also charged a hefty salt tax. Although India's poor suffered most under the tax, all Indians required salt. Being that England now controlled every aspect of Indian salt, and that the only way Indians could get their salt is by buying it from the British were now able to charge exuberant prices for the cheap commodity. Although it's not all bad though, one of the main reasons curry became popular in India is because of the lack of cheap salt. Indians had to find other ways to season their food. Now they are curry world champions. From 1880s to the 1930s, the British increased the tax of salt several times, causing national outrage throughout the country. The British government's taxing of salt at 8.2% was tantamount to greed and ridiculousness, as is charging Eskimos for scooping ice. So, to protest the salt tax, Gandhi and his 78 followers began a 240-mile march on March 12th. They picked up more and more people at each village, and by the time the swelling ranks arrived in the coastal town of Dandi on April 6th, they had formed a parade that ran 2 miles long. At its climax, Gandhi gathered the crowd around him, scooped a handful of salty mud and said, "With this salt I am shaking the foundation of the British Empire." Gandhi encouraged everyone to make illegal, untaxed salt, and by the time India regained its independence 17 years later, common salt was indeed common salt. The only problem was common salt contains little to no iodine, an ingredient crucial to health. By the early 1900s, governments had realized that adding iodine to salt was one of the cheapest and most effective health measures a government could take to help prevent birth defects and mental deficiencies. Even Indian doctors realized that with India's iodine-depleted soil and catastrophically high birth rate, they could save millions of children from crippling birth defects. But even decades after Gandhi's march to Dandi, salt production was an industry by the people, for the people, and the iodized salt of the West pushed onto India retained a whiff of colonialism. Although it would cost India just 1 penny per person per year to produce enough iodized salt for its citizens, 500 million people currently do not have access to sufficient levels of iodine, causing India to be one of the nations with the highest rates of birth defects in recent history. The consequences are grim. The lack of trace iodine causes goiter, an ugly swelling of the thyroid gland in the neck. If the deficiency persists, the thyroid gland shrivels up. Since the thyroid regulates production and release of hormones, the body cannot run smoothly without it, and people can quickly lose mental faculties and even regress to mental retardation without it. Today, India has the highest prevalence of iodine-related health conditions, with 500 million people suffering from deficiency, 54 million people from goiter, and 2 million from full-blown hypothyroidism. It gets even worse when you consider that iodine deficiency during pregnancy has the potential to cause birth defects and mental disabilities that don't go away with age. In fact, it has been hypothesized that supplying India with iodized salt is likely both the cheapest and easiest way to increase the mean global IQ. The moral of the story is never trust the British. Thanks for watching. Bye everybody.
You call anonymously!
They know me. They know my voice. They'll know me. Please, you gotta do it for me. I'm begging you. Please. Please. No.